Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Greek mythology. Today we are getting into the Odyssey part of the Trojan War. And it'll begin with the fall of Troy, as you can see here. But let's go ahead and jump into this. Chapter 14, The Fall of Troy. The greatest part of this story comes from Virgil. The capture of Troy is the subject of the second book of the Aeneid and is one of the best, if not the best, story Virgil ever told. Concise, pointed, vivid. The beginning and the end of my account are not in Virgil. I have taken the story of Philoctetes and the death of Ajax from two plays of the 5th century tragic poet Sophocles. The end, the tale of what happened to the Trojan women when Troy fell, comes from a play by Sophocles' fellow playwright Euripides. It is a curious contrast to the martial spirit of the Aeneid. To Virgil, as to all Roman poets, war was the noblest and most glorious of human activities. 400 years before Virgil, a Greek poet looked at it differently. What was the end of that far-famed war? Euripides seems to ask. Just this: a ruined town, a dead baby, a few wretched women. With Hector dead, Achilles knew, as his mother had told him, that his own death was near. One more great feat of arms he did before his fighting ended forever. Prince Memnon of Ethiopia, the son of the goddess of the dawn, came to the assistance of Troy with a large army, and for a time, even though Hector was gone, the Greeks were hard pressed and lost many a gallant warrior, including swift-footed Antilochus, old Nestor's son. Finally, Achilles killed Memnon in the glorious combat, the Greek hero's last battle. Then he himself fell beside in the Scaean gates. He had driven the Trojans before him up the wall of Troy. There Paris shot an arrow at him, and Apollo guided it so that it struck his foot in the one spot where he could be wounded, his heel. His mother, Thetis, when he was born, had intended to make him invulnerable by dipping him into the river Styx, but she was careless and did not see that to it that the water covered the part of the foot by which she was holding him. He died, and Ajax carried his body out of the battle while Odysseus held the Trojans back. It is said that after he had been burned on the funeral pyre, his bones were placed in the same urn that held his friend Patroclus. His arms, those marvelous arms Thetis had brought him from Hephaestus, caused the death of Ajax. It was decided in full assembly that the heroes who best deserved them were Ajax and Odysseus. A secret boat was then taken between the two, and Odysseus got the arms. Such a decision was a very serious matter in those days. It was not only that the man who won was honored, the man who was defeated was to be held to be dishonored. Ajax saw himself disgraced, and in a fit of furious anger, he determined to kill Agamemnon in Menelaus. He believed, and with reason, that they had turned the boat against him. At nightfall, he went behind them, and he had reached their quarters when Athena struck him with madness. He thought the flocks and herds of the Greeks were the army and rushed to kill them, believing that he was slaying now this chieftain, now that. Finally, he dragged to his tent a huge ram, which, to his distracted mind, was Odysseus, bound him to the tent pole, and beat him savagely. Then his frenzy left him. He regained his reason and saw that his disgrace in not winning the arms had been but a shadow as compared with the same his own deeds had drawn down upon him. His rage by folly, his madness, would be apparent to everyone. The slaughtered animals were lying all over the field. The poor cattle, he said to himself, killed to no purpose by my hand. And I stand here alone, hateful to men and to gods. In such a state, only a coward clings to life. A man, if he cannot live nobly, can die nobly. He drew his sword and killed himself. The Greeks would not burn his body, they buried him. They held that a suicide should not be honored with a funeral pyre and urn burial. His death following so soon upon Achilles dismayed the Greeks. Victory seemed as far off as ever. Their prophet Calchas told them that he had no message from the gods for them, but that there was a man among the Trojans who knew the future, the prophet Helenus. If they captured him, they could learn from him what they should do. Odysseus succeeded in making him a prisoner, and he told the Greeks Troy would not fall until someone fought against the Trojans with the bow and arrows of Hercules. These had been given when Hercules died to the prince Philoctetes, the man who had fired his funeral pyre and who later had joined the Greek host when they sailed to Troy. On the voyage, the Greeks stopped at an island to offer a sacrifice, and Philoctetes was bitten by a serpent, a most frightful wound. It would not heal. It was impossible to carry him to Troy, and he was, the army, as he was, and the army could not wait. They left him finally at Lemnos, then an uninhabited island, although once the heroes of the quest of the Golden Fleece had found plenty of women there. It was cruel to desert the helpless sufferer, but many were desperate to get on to Troy, and with his bow and arrows he would at least never lack for food. Then Helena spoke. However, the Greeks knew well that it would be hard to persuade him whom they had so wronged to give his precious weapons to them. So they sent Odysseus, the master of crafty cunning, to get them by trickery. Some say that Diomedes went with him, and others Neoptolemus, also called Pyrrhus, the young son of Achilles. They succeeded in stealing the bow and arrows, but when it came to leaving the poor wretch alone there, derived of them, they could not do it. In the end, they persuaded him to go with them. Back at Troy, the wise physician of the Greeks healed him, and when at last he went joyfully once again into battle, the first man he wounded with his arrows was Paris. As he fell, Paris begged to be carried to Oenone, the nymph he had lived with on Mount Ida before the three goddesses came to him. She had told him that she knew a magic drug to cure any ailment. They took him to her, and he asked her for his life, but she refused. His desertion of her, his long forgetfulness, could not be forgiven in a moment because of his need. She watched him die. Then she went away and killed herself. Troy did not fall because Paris was dead. He was indeed no great loss. At last the Greeks learned that there was a most sacred image of Pallas Athena in the city called the Palladium, and that as long as the Trojans had it, Troy could not be taken. Accordingly, the two greatest of the chieftains left alive by then, Odysseus and Diomedes, determined to try to steal it. Diomedes was the one who bore the image off. In a dark night, he climbed the wall with Odysseus's help, found the Palladium, and took it to the camp. With this great encouragement, the Greeks determined to wait no longer, but devise some way to put an end to the endless war. They saw by now that unless they could get the army into the city and take the Trojans by surprise, they would never conquer. Almost 10 years had passed since they had first laid siege to the town, and it seemed as strong as ever. The walls stood uninjured. They had never suffered a real attack. The fighting had taken place for the most part at a distance from them. The Greeks must find a secret way of entering the city or accept defeat. The result of this new determination and new vision was the stratagem of the wooden horse. It was, as anyone would guess, the creation of Odysseus's wily mind. He had a skillful worker in wood make a huge wooden horse, which was hollow and so big that it could hold a number of men. Then he persuaded, and had a great difficulty in doing so, certain of the chieftains to hide inside it, along with himself, of course. They were all terror-stricken except Achilles' son, Neoptolemus, and indeed what they faced was no slight danger. The idea that was that all the other Greeks should take camp and apparently put out to sea, but they would really hide beyond the nearest island where they could not be seen by the Trojans. Whatever happened, they would be safe. They could sail home if anything went wrong. But in that case, the men inside the wooden horse would surely die. Odysseus, as can be readily believed, had not overlooked this fact. His plan was to leave a single Greek behind in the deserted camp, primed with a tale calculated to make the Trojans draw the horse into the city, and without investigating it. Then, when night was darkest, the Greeks inside were to leave their wooden prison and open the city gates to the army, which by that time would have sailed back and be waiting before the wall. A night came when the plan was carried out. Then the last day of Troy dawned. On the walls, the Trojan archers saw with astonishment two sights, each as startling as the other. In front of the Scaean gate stood an enormous figure of a horse, such a thing as no one had ever seen, an apparition so strange that it was vaguely terrifying, even though there was no sound or movement coming from it. No sound or movement anywhere, indeed. The noisy Greek camp was hushed. Nothing was stirring there, and the ships were gone. Only one conclusion seemed possible. The Greeks had given up. They had sailed for Greece. They had accepted defeat. All Troy was exulted. Her long warfare was over. Her sufferings lay behind her. The people flocked to the abandoned Greek camp to see the sights. Here Achilles had sought so long. There Agamemnon's tent had stood. This was the quarters of the trickster Odysseus. What rapture to see the places empty, nothing in them now to fear. At least they drifted back to where that monstrosity, the wooden horse, stood, and they gathered around it, puzzled what to do with it. Then the Greeks who had been left behind in the camp discovered himself to them. His name was Sinon, and he was a most plausible speaker. He was seized and dragged to Priam, weeping and protesting that he no longer wished to be a Greek. The story he told was one of Odysseus's masterpieces. Pallas Athena had been exceedingly angry, Sinon said, at the theft of the Palladium, and the Greeks in terror had sent to the oracle to ask how they could appease her. The oracle answered, "With blood and with a maiden slain, you calmed the winds when first you came to Troy. With blood must your return be sought. With a Greek life make expiation." He himself, Sinon told Priam, was the wretched victim chosen to be sacrificed. All was ready for the awful rite, which was to be carried out just before the Greeks' departure, but in the night he had managed to escape and, hidden in a swamp, had watched the ship sail away. It was a good tale, and the Trojans never questioned it. They pitied Sinon and assured him that he should henceforth live as one of themselves. So it befell that by false cunning and pretended tears, those were conquered whom great Diomedes had never overcome, nor savage Achilles, nor 10 years of warfare, nor 1,000 ships. But Sinon did not forget the second part of his story. The wooden horse had been made, he said, as a votive offering to Athena, and the reason for its immense size was to discourage the Trojans from taking it into the city. What the Greeks hoped for was that the Trojans would destroy it and so draw down upon them Athena's anger. Placed in the city, it would turn her favor to them and away from the Greeks. The story was clever enough to have had by itself, in all probability, the desired effect. But Poseidon, the most bitter of all the gods against Troy, contrived an addition which made the issue certain. The priest Laocoon, when the horse was first discovered, had been urgent with the Trojans to destroy it. I fear the Greeks, even when they bear gifts, he said. Cassandra, Priam's daughter, had echoed this warning, but no one ever listened to her, and she had gone back to the palace before Sinon appeared. Laocoon and his 2 sons heard the story with suspicion, and the only doubters there. As Sinon finished, suddenly over the sea came 2 fearful serpents, swimming to the land. Once there, they glided straight to Laocoon. They wrapped their huge coils around him and the 2 lads, and they crushed the life out of them. Then they disappeared within Athena's temple. There could be no further hesitation. To the horrified spectators, Laocoon had been punished for oppressing the entry of the horse, which most certainly no one else would now do. All the people cried, "Bring the carven image in. Bear it to Athena. Fit gift for the child of Zeus, who the young but hurried forth." Who of the old woman stay at home? With song and rejoicing they brought death in, treachery and destruction. They dragged the horse through the gate and up to the temple of Athena. Then, rejoicing in their good fortune, believing the war ended and Athena's favor restored to them, they went to their houses in peace, as they had not for 10 years. In the middle of the night, the door in the horse opened. One by one, the chieftains let themselves down. They stole to the gates and threw them wide, and into the sweeping town marched the Greek army. What they had first to do could be carried out silently. Fires were started in buildings throughout the city. By the time the Trojans were awake, before they realized what had happened, while they were struggling into their armor, Troy was burning. They rushed out to the street one by one in confusion. Bands of soldiers were waiting there to strike each man down before he could join himself to others. It was not fighting, it was butchery. Very many died without ever a chance of dealing a blow in return. In the more distant parts of the town, the Trojans were able to gather together here and there, and then it was the Greeks who suffered. They were borne down by desperate men who wanted only to kill before they were killed. They knew that the one safety for the conquered was to hope for no safety. This spirit often turned the visitors into the vanquished. The quickest-witted Trojans tore off their own armor and put on that of the dead Greeks, and many a Greek, thinking he was joining friends, discovered too late that they were enemies and paid for the error with his life. On top of the horses, they tore up the roofs and hurled the beams down upon the Greeks. An entire tower standing on the roof of Priam's palace was lifted from its foundations and toppled over. Exulting, the defenders saw it fall and annihilate a great band who were forcing the palace doors. But the success brought only a short respite. Others rushed up carrying a huge beam only over the debris of the tower and the crushed bodies. They battered the doors with it. It crashed through, and the Greeks were in the palace before the Trojans could leave the roof. In the inner courtyard behind the altar were the women and children, and one man, the old king. Achilles had spared Priam, but Achilles' son struck him down before the eyes of his wife and daughters. By now the end was near. The contestant from the first had been unequal. Too many Trojans had been slaughtered in the first surprise. The Greeks could not be beaten back anywhere. Slowly the defense ceased. Before morning all the leaders were dead except one, Aphrodite's son, Aeneas. Alone among the Trojan chiefs escaped. He fought the Greeks as long as he could find a living Trojan to stand with him. But as the slaughter spread and death came near, he thought of his home, the helpless people he had left there. He could do nothing more for Troy, but perhaps something could be done for them. He hurled to them his old father, his little son, his wife, and he went, and as he went, his mother, Aphrodite, appeared to him, urging him on and keeping him safe from the flames and from the Greeks. Even with the goddess's help, he could not save his wife. When they left the house, she got separated from him and was killed. But the other two he brought away through the enemy, past the city gates, out into the country. His father on his shoulders, his son clinging to his hand. No one but a divinity could have saved them, and Aphrodite was the only one of the gods that day who helped a Trojan. She helped Helen too. She got her out of the city and took her to Menelaus. He received her gladly, and as he sailed for Greece, she was with him. When morning came, what had been the proudest city in Asia was a fiery ruin. All that was left of Troy was a band of helpless captive women whose husbands were dead, whose children had been taken from them. They were waiting for their masters to carry them overseas to slavery. Chief among the captives was the old queen Hecuba and her daughter-in-law, Hector's wife, Andromache. For Hecuba all was ended. Crouched on the ground, she saw the Greek ships getting ready, and she watched the city burn. Troy is no longer, she told herself. And I, who am I? A slave men drive like cattle, an old gray woman that has no home. What sorrow is there that is not mine? Country lost and husband and children. Glory of all my house brought low. And the women around her answered, we stand at the same point of pain. We are two slaves. Our children are crying, call to us with tears. Mother, I am all alone. To the dark ships now they drive me, and I cannot see you, mother. One woman still had her child. Andromache held in her arms her son, Astyanax, the little boy who had once shrunk back from his father's high-crested helmet. He is so young, she thought. They will let me take him with me. But from the Greek camp, a herald came to her and spoke flattering words. He told her that she must not hate him for the news he brought to her against his will. Her son, she broke in, not that he does not go with me. He answered, the boy must die, be thrown down from the towering walls of Troy. Now, let it be done. Endure like a brave woman. Think, you are alone. One woman and a slave and no help anywhere. She knew what he said was true. There was no help. She said goodbye to her child. Weeping, my little one, there. You cannot know what waits for you. How will it be, falling down, all broken, and none to pity? Kiss me, never again. Come closer, your mother who bore you. Put your arms around my neck. Now kiss me, lips to lips. The soldiers carried him away. Just before they threw him from the wall, they had killed on Achilles' grave a young girl, Hecuba's daughter, Polyxena. With the death of Hector's son, Troy's last sacrifice was accomplished. The women waiting for the ships watched the end. Troy had perished. The great city, only a red flame now lives there. The dust is rising, spreading out like a great wing of smoke, and all is hidden. And we now are gone, one here, one there, and Troy is gone forever. Farewell, dear city. Farewell, my country, where my children lived. There below the Greek ships wait. So yeah, that ends that particular chapter and episode. The next chapter starts the adventures of Odysseus, who we now I think is probably the more well-known story of the Trojan War. They sail past so many dangers, have to make their way, and they are delayed immensely on their way back home. But they will eventually reach home and have to take home back from suitors who direly want Odysseus's wife to take over the kingdom. So yeah, it's like I said, I think his adventures are the most interesting part of the story. But yeah, we're getting there. We're slowly making our way through the book. But yeah. So we see how the city of the city-state of Troy falls. So you have battle for over a decade. And finally, the Greeks are like, the only way we're going to have a chance to finish this is through a cunning action of trickery and guile. So that's what they do with the Trojan horse. And that's also where we get the reference to a Trojan virus when it comes to computers. You know, it's hidden, but it piggybacks onto something else and infects the computer. So you don't necessarily notice it until it's too late. But yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.